What does it really mean to belong at school? And what happens when a child doesn't? Roger Mitchell, head teacher at Ripple Primary and a lifelong champion of inclusive education, believes we don't just need trauma-informed schools, we need trauma-responsive ones, filled with emotionally available adults who challenge systems and stand up for every child. In this episode, we explore the power of relationships, radical empathy, and why inclusion is about far more than policies. It's about presence, practice, and heart. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Hello and welcome back to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're having one of the most important conversations in education: belonging, behaviour, and the role of emotionally supportive adults in children's lives. Joining me is Roger Mitchell, head teacher at Ripple Primary School in Barking and Dagenham, one of the most deprived boroughs in the UK, and a place where Roger has been making a difference since 1988. He leads a 950 pupil school across 2 sites, and under his leadership, Ripple has become a profoundly emotionally available school, one that lives by the motto, everyone is welcome and everyone belongs. Roger is also a trustee at Nurture UK and a powerful advocate for inclusive, trauma-responsive practice. His work challenges the systemic barriers that keep children at the margins, and he speaks with refreshing honesty about what it means to build a school culture where nurture isn't an add-on, it's the foundation. In this episode, we talk about what gets in the way of real inclusion, how emotionally available adults can change lives, and why challenging institutional indifference might just be the work of our time. So, Roger, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, for the invitation.
Yeah, it's a genuine. I know how busy head teachers are. I've tried to get through to head teachers numerous times, so I appreciate you giving me any of your time whatsoever. We obviously connected on LinkedIn, and there was a post that you put out which kind of sparked my interest, and there was just the passion and the kind of the way that you were talking about inclusivity and kind of your approaches to education just felt quite refreshing, which is sad in some ways, but it felt refreshing, and we've kind of been interacting a little bit. Now, I know that one of your phrases, your catchphrases, if you like, is if you lose a child from their school, you lose a child. And I think that might actually be on your LinkedIn profile. What led you to such a deep belief in the power of belonging?
Well, I think belonging, to me, it's the most powerful word we can use in terms of inclusion. And something that has always been part of what we've done is to try and ensure that in our very, very diverse school, we make sure that everybody feels like they belong. I mean, something you didn't mention is that we have EAL, English as additional language, at 86% in the school, but it's no major single group. It's spread across 72 different languages. We are incredibly culturally diverse. And I think somebody said to me a while ago, and this got me thinking even more so, what happens if somebody says they don't want to belong at your school? Because you're saying everyone's welcome, everyone belongs. What happens if somebody doesn't want to belong? And I just thought, well, at that point, you have to be focusing on yourself and your school and your policies and your practices and the reality of what day-to-day looks like to find out why they don't want to belong with you. And so I think the onus for me on belonging lies with the school. And that comes back to unconditional positive regard, really. Looking back to when I was at college and I was learning all about unconditional positive regard and what Carl Rogers was saying about it, I think that what really strikes home is that children, we are the educators and advocates for the children in our care. And as such, what we need to do is we need to maintain an unconditional positive regard for the child because they are a child and they're a child in our care. And in doing so, what we have to do is we have to meet the child at the point where the child is at any given point in time. So if that child is dysregulated, in crisis, what we're not going to do is we're not going to put a whole load of provisos in place and any requirements on the child to be behaving or acting or whatever in a particular way before we engage with them. Because if we do that, we're not advocating for them and we're not teaching them. So we meet the child where they are at that point in time so we can address their needs. It doesn't matter if it's an educational need, like not being able to do a long division or something like that, or if it's an emotional need. We treat it all the same and we meet the child at the point where they're at and we take them forward from there, take them with us and work with them. And if we do that, then hopefully everyone will be able to feel that they do belong. And the greater that feeling of belonging, the greater the strength of the community that we have.
Yeah, 100%. We refer to it as kind of a bit of a almost tagline of it's connection before solution kind of thing. It's that building trust, building connection as your primary. And then from there, we've got, as I say, if we're in a sense of community, we tend to look out for our own and we tend to kind of engage more positively towards people within our community. So that's a great starting point. You mentioned a term there, which obviously I'm familiar with the unconditional positive regard from, as you mentioned, Carl Rogers. But what does that mean to you and your interpretation of, especially when working with children?
Well, I think unconditional positive regard. I should say as well. We try and do this not just with children. It's a kind of non-negotiable for any of us that work with or on behalf of children within our school. This is where we're from. If you don't want to work in that way, then there are other places you can work, because we will protect that as much as we can. So it's all about being able to understand where the child is at by knowing how they've got there. So we have a couple of things we talk about in school. We talk about professional maturity. That's what I introduced two foundations before, 20 years ago, before we had all the modern educational psychology language of trauma-informed practice and ACEs, and before we were really talking about attachment theory and the impact of attachment on children's development, socially and emotionally. So I introduced these two phrases, professional maturity and professional generosity. Professional maturity is all about basically doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not doing the right thing because you fear the consequences of doing the wrong thing. And that started with the grown-ups in the school. We were in a position at the time where the team was a little fractured. They'd gone through a period of no leadership or little leadership because their head teacher was terminally ill and hadn't been in for a while. I initially was asked to come in and cover this as an acting head post. And that's back in 2005. But it needed drawing together and people were sniping at each other. So I also introduced this idea of professional generosity. And professional generosity is essentially when something doesn't go right, it's all about before you respond to the what has happened, you make sure you fully ask yourself all about the why it's happened. Now, we're not necessarily asking the child why it's happened because the child doesn't necessarily know. And if they're in crisis, if something's gone badly wrong, and it's not necessarily effective for the child to have that kind of conversation at that point in time. But it's definitely a point about making sure that we're asking why it might have happened before we respond to what. So that is the foundation of how we work in the school. I'll give you an example of professional maturity. Doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because you fear the consequence of doing the wrong thing. When my staff mark their books, they mark them because they need to know the next steps for the child. You know, they need to be engaging with that. They don't mark them because they fear I'm going to drop a book look on them and have a go because they haven't marked their books. So they're doing it for the right reasons. And that flows through everything we do. And having started that with the grown-ups in school, we now have that filtered through to the children. And in fact, we were inspected recently, end of April, and one of the comments that came back from one of the children, which is quoted in our report, when they were asked about why behaviour is so good in the school, is they just said, because we all agree on what the right thing to do is and we do it. And that's nice to get that back to the child, from the child. In terms of the approach of the always asking why before you deal with what, that gives you that emotional safety net, I think. So if something happens, the child knows there isn't just going to be a blanket punitive response. They know that if something goes wrong, we're going to treat it as a learning opportunity. And a learning opportunity for ourselves as well to understand the child better too. But a learning opportunity for the child to understand where they're, what the boundaries are, why we've got those boundaries, and how we're going to try and address it and support them to address it better next time so they fit in with the boundaries that we put in. And I think it's really important to point out there that when you're talking about what was celebrated again in our Ofsted report recently, that we have a sanction-free, not behaviour policy, but behaviour through nurture and relationships policy, it's called. Sanction-free doesn't mean boundary-free. Children need to know what the boundaries are. Children need the security. Staff need to know what the boundaries are and what the security is as well. Everybody needs those things because we don't live in chaos and schools don't run on anarchy. But as long as our policies and our procedures are thoughtful, accurate, caring, then there's no reason why we shouldn't have those boundaries in place that are reasonable boundaries. So when you're talking about this stuff with children, what we're doing is we're building relationships that's come out of what's happened. And that's the important bit. I've got a phrase that I use, which is, it's the relationships we build, not the sanctions we impose, that make the difference. And that's where sanction-free comes from as well. Because if you've taken the time for that child to re-regulate to the point at which you can talk about it, you have that conversation, then why would you, when you started building that relationship with that child and you're developing a relationship you maybe have built over a long time with that child, put a sanction in the way to put a barrier up between you and the child? That just, to me, it just doesn't make sense. So if you're building a relationship, the last thing you need is a sanction to impose a barrier to that relationship. But what you do need to do is continue to work with your child to build that relationship. And something I think you mentioned earlier, institutional indifference, that's really important for me. There is a really lovely quote. I'm actually going to quote it to you because the phrase, I understand it, I'm taking this from a report by the Traveller Movement called Thought Not Taught about coercive exclusions. And they use the phrase institutional indifference, but I believe it was coined by Doreen Lawrence originally when she was trying to achieve justice with various people, institutions for her son and others like him who had suffered the worst possible violence and been killed, and the barriers she was finding in terms of getting justice. And she termed it institutional indifference. And it's been defined as, and I'll quote this, an ignorance that's not one of blissful unawareness or innocent absence of knowledge, but rather of rational calculation. Now, to put that into perspective within a school context, when I talk about professional generosity being you always ask about whys before you react to what's happened, if you're not prepared to include yourself and your school and your policies in the whys, if you're not prepared to at least start to question, but hopefully thoroughly question reflectively, when the child has a challenging, or has a crisis or is challenging in any way, if you're not prepared to ask, is there anything that I did or is there anything that we do that could have contributed to that, then if you're not putting yourself in the whys along with everything else, then you are going to suffer from institutional indifference, by which we just maintain a wrong status quo rather than, you remain part of the problem rather than being part of the solution.
It's really interesting, and I've come across that quite a lot. We've encountered a situation not long ago where a situation occurred for a young girl that's within my world, where yes, her behaviour was inappropriate and stuff like that, but it's that missing, as you mentioned, the unconditional positive regard. The behaviour may be inappropriate, but she's still valued, accepted for her thoughts and feelings. And backtracking on that to kind of go, yeah, maybe her behaviour in that moment wasn't right, but what was contributing to that behaviour in the circumstance? Her EHCP plan hadn't been followed. There was numerous interactions that were not right leading up to that had kind of contributed to this, but that's that personal responsibility. And as you rightly said, I can tell one of the things that you really work hard on is building a culture from the kind of the top down, it just permeates your entire organization, that the staff are not being held to any different standards to the children. Yeah. Essentially, that personal responsibility is a normal part of life, which is, as you said, we have to learn from the mistakes we make. We shouldn't be shamed and blamed about those mistakes, but it's about, we still have a responsibility to learn from them. And it's the teachers and the school itself that are part of that learning process.
I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, every unconditional positive regard means that there is always an opportunity for a fresh start.
Yeah.
So we're not harking back to previous. We're learning from it. And we do have to honestly address and have restorative conversations about what's happened so that it means something. But then we draw a line and we move forwards. So we can have a fresh start. Now, everybody, often says that the hackneyed phrase is every day is a chance for a fresh start. It's every day's a new day. Some children, it might need to be every lesson. Some children, it might need to be every 10 minutes, to get that reset point. But what we need to do is build on the conversation we're having with the child, not hark back to previous. Some of the biggest flare-ups that you get, I've witnessed with children getting themselves on the wrong side of an adult, is caused by the adult. In fact, there's plenty of research that says that about 90%, I think, of initiation or escalation in a major conflict between an adult and a child in school has started with the adult, or it's exacerbated by the adult. And that's, I'll give you the very simple one. So, young man spends time in my office having lunch with me. Call him Tony. They're all called Tony in my world. But they're not all male Tonys. There can be female Tonys as well.
Yeah.
And we've had a good conversation. We've had lunch together, and we did that because eating together is a good thing. It's a very traditional thing. It's a sharing thing. And we had a conversation about what was going on in the playground and why things weren't going as positively as we'd like them to for any of us. And we had that. And I said, okay, well, you got 10 minutes left. Off you go out to the playground. And Tony went out to the playground. And the first thing he met up with was, oh, it's you again. Boom. Yeah. So that's part of maintaining that consistency of approach and making sure that you always do that in the same way all the time. The child knows that they're not going to get that approach from somebody else, even though they've had things with you. But in building this, I've got to say, I truly believe nothing happens without leadership. You can develop things together, but if this approach doesn't come from the top down, it's not going to happen. Yeah. And because you're building this culture, it puts an enormous responsibility that you have to accept as a leader, that you have to be the role model at all times for what you're trying to get from your school. If there's ever a time when anybody can say, well, Roger didn't do it, so why should I? Then it's all going to start unpicking. So you've got to be consistent about it, completely consistent, and make sure that you can then talk to that member of staff and have those conversations just like you would have with the child. There's nothing works with grown-ups that doesn't work with children and vice versa. And then you'd be able to explain why what happened wasn't appropriate. And okay, and now we draw a line and we move forward from there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an interesting question on that as far as obviously creating that culture of that mindset, really, isn't it, that you're working towards with your staff team all the time. And I'm sure you have encountered, though, where, it's easy for any person to fall into the trap of labeling, like that child being difficult, for instance. How do you kind of manage that within your, is it just through the conversations again, or is there kind of work that you do? How do you help promote that culture?
Well, I mean, there are certain things, I've got certain mantras, and they're not all mine. Some of them are, but they're things we pick up. So things that constantly get repeated, like the fact that we should all know by now, there's so much research done, so much study, but we should all know by now that behaviour is the communication of a need and not a need in itself.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly reinforcing that, then that fits in beautifully with my dealing with, looking at the whys before we deal with the whats.
Yeah.
It works really well. And if we start changing the language, so we try not to, as best we can, because we've been given the language, but we try not to talk about persistent disruptive behaviour in our school, and we talk about persistent disruptive need. Yeah. Now, I think there's something at perhaps a national level that needs to be addressed in terms of, if we all accept that behaviour is not a need in itself, it's communication of a need, then why do we still talk about persistent disruptive behaviour when it's actually persistent disruptive need, and it makes up 64% of all suspensions in England, which is thousands every year. Yeah. So there's something there, I think, as well. But I think it's there's lots of things you say. Yeah, there's lots of things you say. So every time a child says, I mean, right from being a baby teacher, right back in 1988 when I started, I don't know where it came from, but I've always had a couple of things that I've always thought and always said. I've always said to children, it's all right to get things wrong. If you get things right all the time, you're just reinforcing what you already know. If you get things wrong, it's an opportunity to learn something new. So how exciting is that? And that's great. And the other one is, and this is, I think, really important to use for children, but also get that with staff, is if you don't understand what I'm trying to teach you, it's not your fault. It's just I haven't found the right way to teach it to you yet.
Wonderful.
Now, if we do that with behaviour and we do that with curriculum and everything, then what we're doing is we're working with the child, and you lose this whole traditional view of I know what you need to know, so you better sit down and listen to me, to being, oh, you're having trouble with that. Let's have a work at it together and see where we get to.
Yeah.
It's a different attitude. So it comes into every little facet that you talk about, every time that something happens. And you can do it really quite kindly, I think. Or, I don't know if it's passive aggressive, but so it started off when I first arrived at the school, children used to get sent to my office. It was like I was the new boy. I was the new acting head teacher, and I was getting streams of children sent to my office. And more than that, I would wander around the school and I would notice children who were in corridors. They might be stood outside the door. They might be wandering aimlessly. There wasn't a purpose for them being there except the teacher had sent them out. So what I used to do when I found children outside the classroom, I just used to ask them what had happened, and they'd usually explain, I did this and sir or miss sent me out. Okay. And then I say, well, if I take you back in, what's going to happen? They say, I'll have a go. I'll try, I'll see if I can settle back down again. Usually that was, normally the 9 times out of 10 that happened. So then I just knock on the door, walk the child in and say, oh, hello, sir, or hello, miss. Look, I found Tony outside. So I just brought him back to you. And then they'd come and smile on your face. This is why I say, was it passive aggressive? I don't know. And after a few weeks of doing that, I ended up having a staff meeting explaining that wasn't going to happen anymore. And I wasn't going to keep retrieving and returning children to classrooms because we wouldn't be sending them out, full stop. And it all came under the same heading as taking responsibility for the children's behaviour yourself. And I did explain very clearly that if you keep sending your children to me, I will build a relationship with those children and they'll behave for me. But when I send them back to you, they won't behave for you. And if you want them to behave for you, you're going to have to put the time in and build a relationship yourself, and deal with it yourself. So all of this, going on and on and on. And I think the first time I realised that he was getting embedded in the school, properly embedded, I mean like second nature, don't even think about it, is when a member of staff came up to me and said, I think I did really well with my professional generosity today. And I said, oh, why is that? And they said, oh, so-and-so came up to me and they snapped at me and I didn't snap back because, I don't know, maybe their dog died. I don't know, they said. And I thought, well, what a very straightforward way of saying it, because we don't know what happens in people's lives. And this is something we've done as an exercise at school and we continue to do it and we have reminders on it. So we all know about Maslow's hierarchy in terms of a child's readiness to learn, yeah? But how often do we ever consider it in terms of a colleague's readiness to teach or just be at work? If they are coming in and they've had a row with their partner that morning, we don't know that. If they, we've got a crisis in terms of people not being able to, I've never known a time in a school that's been as bad as this for staff worrying about their own finances. Yeah. So if they're worried about not having the heating on, whether or not they're going to buy their own kids a coat or a pair of shoes because it's a choice or whatever, and if they haven't got maybe that level of emotional security, then we can't expect them to be up at the top of the triangle with Maslow. And then if we take that maybe a step further and start asking ourselves about Maslow's hierarchy in terms of a family's readiness to parent, then we start getting into the whole, when we're looking at the whys, we're not just looking at the child in isolation. We're looking at the child in the context of the family, and we're looking at the child in the context of the family, in the context of their community. So we need to be having that whole picture of what that child's life experience is. And way back, I used to get staff saying to me that kid needs to sort themselves out. And, you'd say, well, if they could sort themselves out, they would sort themselves out, but they can't sort themselves out, which is why they're doing what they're doing. And actually, that's where our duty of care comes in. And we kind of moved from there to, I know why they behave like that. I've met their mum. And then you have to start thinking about, do you know what? The child has got a restricted set of choices because of their life experience with the family. What are the family's restricted set of choices that they have in terms of, are they part of a community? Do they have an extended family they can rely on? Frequently not in our case, because many of our children and the families are newly arrived, and they've suffered trauma from origin and also trauma in transit to actually get to somewhere safe. So we need to be asking ourselves, is it, what is it about the child that if they're behaving in this way, don't just say, well, I understand it because we know what the family's like. Start asking yourself about what the restrictions are and the choices that they can make as a family and what their family life was like for them when they were growing up. It's even as simple as the child who doesn't come to school because mum's on her own and the little one's ill and they haven't got a social network to be able to get somebody else to drop the older one at school. So we can't start pointing the finger of blame if we don't actually have a full understanding of the circumstances. And by doing that, hopefully we have the same level of emotional responsibility towards our whole school community, because it's got to be more than just the children. It's the children, it's the staff, it's the families, it's everybody. And that's actually built up really nicely in the school. It's nice. It was really recognised as well. I'm going to quote you from Ofsted because I'm very proud of it. If I can just go to here. So the opening paragraph of my inspection report says, our inspection report, because it's not just mine, it belongs to myself, my staff, my families, my kids, and the school, everyone. Pupils are safe and happy in this nurturing community. They appreciate the caring support they receive from all staff One pupil summed this up by saying, teachers encourage you and make you more confident. A quote that didn't get into there, but I was given by the lead inspector. She said to me, I just talked to one of your year ones, one of your 6-year-olds, and asked them who they thought the trusted adults were in the school. And she said, the child looked at me incredulously and said, every adult is a trusted adult in our school. And I just, you can just feel when you're getting those things back from the children, you just know. And in terms of the behaviour policy, the school's behaviour policy fosters strong, respectful relationships throughout. Pupils want to behave well because they know that it is, quote, the right thing to do. The school's values are important to pupils and they respect and embrace everyone's differences. And then finally, at the end, when it talks about leadership, it says, school leaders are dedicated to continuing to improve the school. Staff are very positive about working here. They know their well-being is a key consideration in school decisions. So it's about caring and kindness for everyone. And I do think that, I say this, the most powerful leadership tool that you've got is kindness. Absolutely. Because you can't argue against it, can you? You can take the moral high ground on kindness.
Well, I suppose it's fundamental. I have a few strings to my bow, and I run businesses, and it's always that I start with my why is always one of the fundamental elements of what I do, and obviously working within the field that I do, it's we want to Able Training are working towards being perceived as the most caring training company in the care sector. That's our aim and our mission. But that doesn't mean we're only caring towards the customers or caring towards I'm caring towards my staff team and I'm caring towards, and I try. So it's that fundamental culture again, as you said, it's leading by example. I really liked what you were saying there as far as I've encountered quite a lot of prejudice towards us. Sometimes we allow the kids off, but then we don't allow the parents off. It was really nice to hear that kind of that unconditional positive regard actually goes outside of the school grounds. It is universal habit, and I feel it's like any habit. You got to practice it. You got to work it. You can't necessarily be selective of just going, well, I only use that on a Thursday. It kind of needs to be in everything we do, just to make it so it becomes an automatic process to become curious, to be more relational and everything like that.
Yeah. Curious is a good word. Let's be curious about children's behaviour. Let's be curious about their additional needs. If you're going to do that, then you're going to learn, aren't you, about the child? So let's be curious.
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today. So I'm quite interested, obviously you've described there, and that's, quite shocking, 70 different languages within your school. That must create some 72. Yeah, I don't miss two. That obviously must create, as far as cultural differences, backgrounds, value structures that some of the kids are coming from must be incredibly diverse. I know that you've done quite a lot of work with the Gypsy, Roman and Traveller community as well. You mentioned there a reference to one of their their guides and you've done some supported their reports on exclusion and things like that, haven't you? How do you find that maps over? Because obviously, conversationally wise, I should imagine you are working with many children that English isn't their first language, or maybe they don't speak English at all when they first come into your setting. How do you manage that?
Well, I think the first thing is that regardless of language, children's needs don't change. Regardless of heritage, children's needs don't change. They may have different expectations, different boundaries, different sets of thoughts or beliefs. What we do is we have a culture of acceptance, a culture of, because it's belonging. Everyone belongs. If they don't belong, then we're not accepting them. So we need to accept everybody for who they are and what they do and what they believe and so on. And actually, our mission statement, which underpins everything, does, there it is above my fireplace.
Yeah.
And it does say that we listen to each other and every voice is heard. And that's really important. And to give you an idea about the fact that what makes the difference isn't culture or heritage. It's poverty. That's the blanket that goes across everything, crosses all borders. The most deprived children, doesn't matter where they're from, what language they speak, what their origin is, what their heritage is. That's what makes the biggest difference. I'm absolutely convinced it's the socio-economic factors that cut across all of it. But if we're talking about how we respond to it, it quite nicely brings us on to emotionally available adults, because if you think what we've done, and every head teacher will tell you this, I'm sure, is we've had staff training on attachment theory. We've had staff training on adverse childhood experiences. We've had staff training on trauma-informed practice. You've got to ask yourself, so what? So what? How do you move from being trauma-informed to being trauma-responsive? And just to emphasise, I already said about trauma from origin, trauma in transit. The third largest group, a couple of years back, this was the third largest group coming into our borough had come from Italy, but they weren't Italian children. That's just their point of entry into the EU. So you can think of all the places they have come from, not least of all places like Syria, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Sudan, and so on, various places where it's not easy. But when they come into our school, it's all very well saying, oh yeah, well, we tick that box. Staff have done trauma-informed practice training. But what does that actually mean? And for me, it's the emotionally available adult. It's the fact that we've done training on what it means to be an emotionally available adult. And that's not just teaching staff or support staff, or it's our admin team, it's our site team, it's our governing body. It's every single person who works in the school, whether it's directly with or on behalf of children in the school, has done this training that we've introduced ourselves on what it means to be an emotionally available adult. And what does that actually mean? Well, it's the person who's always available. That's obvious. It's the person who's genuinely pleased to see them every day. That welcome. One of the first things I insisted on when I arrived at the school was stop staring at the floor. I don't care what kind of day you've had. Make eye contact, smile, make sure the person coming into the space that you're in feels welcome coming into that space. Very easy to do. Hide your own feelings and just go, hi, hello, good morning, good afternoon, how are you doing? Just ask a question, but don't stare at the floor and ignore people. Let's communicate. The person who children can, I'm not saying children, everybody in the community. So we're emotionally available adults to each other as well. The person they can trust to be consistent and fair. The person who trusts that they can learn from their mistakes. The person who has high expectations of what they're able to achieve even when they've made those mistakes. Yeah, I mean, that's an important one. The person who's able to empathise with their difficulties and their challenges by being curious, by wondering what it's like to walk in their shoes. And really, what we don't want is sympathy. We want empathy. Empathy, trying to connect and understand how they're feeling. The person who reassures them and keeps them safe. So going back to empathy, isn't that what I said about, we've got all these lovely words to say now, but isn't that what I said about professional generosity and asking yourself why? Yeah, it's the same thing, isn't it? So the person who reassures them, keeps them safe, who supports them to develop their resilience. And it's important that we have our emotionally available adults have to be resilient themselves. You know, I think that's vital. And coming back to Maslow, I kind of feel that I'm in a privileged position, as are many of my professional colleagues, that we've reached self-actualization. The very fact that we're sitting here doing the jobs we do means we've got there. Some people have never got there. The fact that we've got there gives us the kind of responsibility that even if we're having a bad day, we've got reserves we can go back on because we know what it's like to have achieved and managed and done it. So I kind of sometimes think, you're having a bad day, but you know what? Just pull yourself together a little bit. You know, if it's really bad, obviously we understand, but there's an awful lot of things where let's try not snap at someone because something's, you stubbed your toe or whatever. Let's try and make it something better than that. And again, it's the person who maintains a consistent and unconditional positive regard for them as well. I'll be repeating myself to go on to that again, but it's so important. Now, if you've got every adult in the school as an emotionally available adult, you can talk about being an emotionally available school. And this is something that's it's an interesting point because I'm a trustee, as you said, of Nurture UK, and Nurture UK have long said about having nurture rooms, and I don't actually agree with nurture rooms. We had a nurture room, but it was a stepping stone to be a fully nurture environment. I have my concerns. They can be really effective if managed in the right way, but I think they can also be in danger of being another place where we label children. You can't, if you need nurture, you've got to go there. If you're that kid who's dysregulated, you've got to go over there and do it. Now, the whole point about being an emotionally available school is you get that everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are, in the playground or in the classroom or in the dining room. You won't get, or you shouldn't get, it's not always perfect, but we try. You shouldn't get any difference in approach from anybody that you're dealing with, which means you're an emotionally available school. And I was talking to one of my secondary colleagues, bless him, and he said, I get it. We've got emotionally available adults. And I said, oh yeah, who's that? And he said, oh, it's the inclusion team. And I said, oh, how many of those are there? And he went, 5. And I was like, you've got 2,000 kids in your school. If there's a couple of things here, what if Bob's not in? What if Jenny goes and gets another job? How's the resilience built into the system to maintain emotional availability for all those children and all the other adults? The other thing is, if you're saying those 5 people are emotionally available, what are you saying about everybody else? Are they, firstly, not able to be emotionally available? Are you telling them they don't have to be emotionally available? It's not good enough, So that's the whole emotionally available school bit, is it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, you get the same deal. And we understand it. And that is how that's the vehicle we've used to go from being trauma-informed to trauma-responsive. And we still have to train. We're still working on things. So we've got a nice little project starting up now, just started, where we are training our older children in the school, our year 5s, ready for next year to be peer mediators. And that's, I think, a real strong thing to do. One of the things Ofsted asked us, which I was interested in, never been asked before, is they asked, in what way do your children in the school get the opportunity to volunteer within school or volunteer within the community? And being able to say, well, we're training up a load of peer mediators and those children are going to be taking on roles to help resolve situations with their peers. That was a good thing. We didn't do it because of Ofsted. We never do anything because of Ofsted. We do what we do because it's the right thing to do. And thankfully Ofsted came in this time. Hadn't done in the past so often, but came in this time and actually said, oh, we really like that. So that was good. They are shifting. Things are moving. I'm going to throw in another thing that I've never been asked on Ofsted before, just because I think it's an interesting question. So 7 inspections that I've led this school through in the time I've been here. various different formats. This is the first time I was ever asked, how many of your staff are still with you since the previous inspection? And the previous inspection was in January 2020, just before COVID, just before everything shut down. So when they came back, it was 5 years, 3 months. And I had to look it up because I'd never been asked before. It wasn't something I was ready with. And it was just over 85% staff retention. And the lead inspector did query it because she said that, and this is very telling, I think, of the situation we're in education at the moment in terms of staff retention, is that she's used to hearing figures more like 60 to 65% over 3 to 5 years. So I think that also tells you that having this whole professional generosity, professional maturity, emotionally available school, it's not just good for the children, it's good for everyone. And staff don't. We got a phone call last week from an agency who didn't believe that we had no staffing needs for September because nobody's leaving. Yeah, and I'm in one of the tougher bits of East London, sixth most deprived borough in the country, and it's not easy. No, there is no such thing as an easy school, but I think that's very telling that if you take that approach, like I say, it's for everyone, it's for the whole school community.
That's fantastic, advocacy for what you're doing. One of the things that when we're reaching out, so a lot of what you're saying and what you do aligns very much with what we teach and what we do as well within my behaviour management stuff, that behavioural support stuff that we do. And it's one of the things we try and get over is that whether it be care or whether it be education, doesn't matter. But sometimes and as you rightly said, it's not a tick box exercise. It shouldn't be the training. It's then the management team, the leadership kind of really engaging with those new practices and making them part of the culture. But although it may be perceived as a cost, actually it'll be a significant improvement. It will be a cost reduction over a period of time. I mean, that's fantastic retention rates. That means you're not having to recruit new teachers and stuff. So even from a financial point of view, there's significant benefit in moving over this. So as well as the moral, and the promoting the why and the well-being of the children and the staff, is also there is financial benefits to it as well.
But also, I think people need to accept that it's not expensive to change cultures. It just takes determination. There's another. I like a quote. The greatest barriers to inclusive education reside in our own minds. Yeah, if we're able to change our minds, if we're able to open our minds, then we're able to be more inclusive in every single way. How much does it cost to get yourself to ask why? Why? And include yourself in the whys. It doesn't cost anything. It's just a mindset change. So you shouldn't need somebody like me telling you that's. In fact, I always say I can't tell you how to run your school because your school's different from mine, but I will tell you how I run mine. And if there's anything you like in it, then great. But what I will say is that it's not just a financial cost saving; it's an emotional cost saving as well. Because yes, it's hard work and it's been a long-term project, and it's 20 years that I've been here, and I'm still not satisfied. We're still going to be trying to do it better. But I get up every morning and I know that I've got the best job in the world and I wouldn't want to do it anywhere else. No. I also know that it's been really hard work getting all of this in place, but now it's there. Life is so much easier. Running a school where behaviour management is based on nurture and relationships is significantly easier than running a school that is policing a punitive sanction-based system.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And it's not just easier in terms of the person power, the manpower, whatever that you want to call it, that it takes to run it. It's easier because you just feel better about yourself, and everyone feels better about themselves. And that child saying, every adult's a trusted adult at my school, and that child saying, we do things the right way, we do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. It's, I don't want to say it's policing itself because it's not even policing, it just takes care of itself. The school takes care of itself in so many ways. And that doesn't mean things don't go wrong. But when something goes wrong, it's how we deal with it that makes the difference, you know?
Yeah.
It's what we do about it that makes the difference. You can approach it in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like you built an incredible foundation, and it's that foundation, meaning the preventative elements are there. So you're not fighting fires all the time because you've just managed to do so much work in actually reducing the chances of those elements of fire triangle ever coming together in the first place.
It's working upstream. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Work upstream so you don't have to deal with things downstream. And if you want to talk about actual costs, the difference with the IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research, that's a tongue twister, their report, Who's Losing Learning, recently they produced 2 reports. I would advise anybody to read both of them. The first one talks about the problem, the challenge. The second one is solution focused. What could we do about it in terms of policy and practice? But they were pointing out there that the levels of exclusions and suspensions have hit all-time record peaks in England. Not just England, but this report was on the English data. And that as well as, if you exclude a child, it's not just got that emotional cost of pulling the total rug out, one of the most supportive rugs out from underneath the child that they've got is taking away their school. Hence if you lose the child from their school, you lose the child. Yeah. Because 9 times out of 10, you really, really do. Those children don't ever recover. And they end up being those children who, it's estimated that the cost of an exclusion per child across their lifetime through all services is about £170,000 a child. And just for the school year 2022-2023, that cohort in England was a cost of 1.6 billion over their lifetime, just for that tranche. Yeah. But this also repeated suspensions are just as damaging to a child's well-being. And actually if you suspend a child, at primary school, it's almost certain that their parent will be at home with them. But if you're suspending a 14 or 15-year-old, do we know where they are? Mm-hmm. The child who you're suspending is likely to be one of the more vulnerable anyway, which is why they've ended up in that circumstance. So what are you doing by taking away their school from them, taking away their safe environment, leaving them unsupervised out on the street, open to child sexual exploitation, child criminal exploitation, gang recruitment and grooming and all kinds of things, and just not being safe. Mm-hmm. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't work for me at all. No. The whole idea of suspensions and exclusions doesn't work for me at all, because whilst we've got those children with us, we can monitor them, care for them, build relationships with them. Somebody pulled me on this, but I'll stick by it completely, is that I feel that suspensions and exclusions are not always, but far too often the professionally lazy option, because they put the needs of the grown-ups before they put the needs of the child. So, yeah.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I'm sure there is exceptional circumstances and variances. But,
absolutely. And I wouldn't ever say that you should remove a head teacher's power to suspend and exclude. But what I think we need to do is we need to be putting those decisions, looking at the numbers, we need to be putting those decisions under much, much greater scrutiny.
One of the things that I feel, and I think it maybe is evidential, the primary schools definitely are getting the hang of it a little bit. There's a lot more primary schools and primary school heads that I kind of speak to that are a little bit more of the mindset of kind of restorative practice or therapeutic or trauma-informed, whatever the language is that we're using. Secondary schools, though, for me, feel maybe a little bit further behind in their approaches. Have you encountered, or do you feel that everything that you're doing can be mapped over to a secondary school environment exactly the same way? Or do you think there is, due to the different pressures, particularly around academic results, that it's always they're going to find it harder?
I think firstly, there is. I've got no issue with our year sixes doing their SATs at the end of the year. What I have got an issue with, always have done, is the problem with them, and what puts the pressure on the school and therefore the pressure on the children is it's the culture surrounding the reporting of the outcomes of those tests. We would do tests with children anyway. It's part of our assessment arsenal. It's what we do, So we do all kinds of things, and testing is, formal testing is part of it. But when you start league tabling, when school leaders, probably more precarious than a football manager in terms of the fact that they're only as safe as their last set of results make them. That is a challenge, and I'm quite happy to put forward that, and I'll quite happily argue the reasons why, if anybody ever really wants to take me to town on it, is that between 2010 and 2014, the system was weaponised against educators, I believe. Change of curriculum, change of how Ofsted was run. There was some. It got political. We ended up with a curriculum that ended up not being the curriculum we were aiming for, with things like the Rose Reports, and moving into a proper curriculum that had built over many, many years to become cognitively relevant, to becoming a curriculum that was based on recall. That, I think, was underpinned by this idea that if you had that sort of curriculum, you can test it more rigidly. If you can test it more rigidly, you can then use the results to start saying, well, that school's worse than that one, and that school's better than that one. So I think there is an overarching, and it's still there, even with the feel that the tide is turning a little bit, but there is still a massive pressure on school leaders that then feeds down to their teachers, that then feeds down to their children, that if they don't get the right results, then that's going to be a problem. Now, what we've managed to prove is that, this approach, which is really coming into its own now, it's really blossoming in my school thoroughly, is that 2 years ago, our combined end of key stage 2 was 61%, which was a percentage or two above national. The year after, it went up by another couple of percent. This year, we're looking at, it's probably going to be more likely nearer 70%. So we've shown that, as you said in the introduction, the way we work isn't peripheral. It's not a bolt-on. It's fundamental to how we work. And it works, And our inspection report, hark on about it, but they were very clear to say that, in fact, I'll give you another quote here from it. It says, the school's, where are we? The school has designed a curriculum that is broad and ambitious. This enables most pupils to grasp important ideas securely and develop their knowledge as they progress through the school. So what they're saying is we haven't compromised on quality of education by taking this relational approach and nurturing approach in terms of everything else we do in the school. Secondary colleagues, I think, do have a challenge, but what I've said is that nothing works, everything that works for children works for the grown-ups. Everything that works for the grown-ups works for the children. If we've got this group in the middle, called teenagers, then why are they any different? We know that the brain develops in different ways and things become less balanced in certain ways, and you go into the whole psychology of it and the actual chemistry of differential growth of bits of brain when you hit puberty and move through your teenage years. And we know that that brain doesn't really settle down again until you're in your mid-20s properly. But I still don't get it when a secondary colleague says to me something like, what you don't understand, Roger, is it's more about crowd control in secondary schools. And my response to that is, well, it's about relationships. If you've got relationships, you don't need crowd control. And it comes back to this idea of you can open your mind and try and work in a way that is relational, maintain your boundaries, but dealing with it in a different way. And actually, at the end of the day, it is a lot easier to run a school that isn't policing a sanction-based punitive system. And zero tolerance policies, love this. So if you just indulge me. Okay, so from the judicial system, okay, we know that Parliament creates laws and judges interpret laws, and they actually contextualise them in terms of what's happened. They ask the whys before they deal with the whats. They won't pronounce a sentence until they've contextualised it. But if they just said, well, you did this, that's going to happen, without asking about personal circumstances or admission of guilt or showing of remorse or whatever, if they just went boom, boom, they wouldn't be judges very long. But we allow it to happen in our schools when we're working with children. You bring a vape into school, you're suspended for 2 days. Well, why would you do that? Why don't you just take the vape off them and not deny them an education and put them at risk by not being at school? It seems crazy to me. And those things cost money. You start taking vapes away from children, hit them in the pocket. Well, that's probably going to help make their minds up, and just explain that's not what we do at our school. But I have seen some really good examples. I was on the school gate with one of my secondary colleagues. He invited me over for a chat in the morning, and let's call him Tony. Tony walks through the gate and he's wearing red trainers. And this school leader, this head teacher, says, oh, Tony. And Tony said, yes, sir. It's like I told the head of year, Mum gets paid on Wednesday and I'll have my black shoes Wednesday. We haven't got the money for them right now. And he said, oh yeah, that's all right. And in they go. Now, because that school leader has had the confidence to be very open about what's going on, all the kids around are listening and they get it. You're not setting a precedent for misbehaviour. You're not setting a precedent that allows children to be deliberately defiant by wearing red trainers because so-and-so is allowed to. What you've done is, I understand your circumstances and I'm working with you. And everybody appreciates that. So there are really good bits of practice in secondary schools, and we need to celebrate them all the time. And they don't have an easy job dealing with the older children, because those young people are trying to establish their own position in society and where they fit into their communities and so on. And it's not easy, but we need to just work in a more understanding way with them. And I honestly don't see how it would be any different from what I do at my school. And I actually know a secondary school. I met the school leader a little while ago that also runs a sanction-free, relational-based behaviour policy. So it can work.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Roger, and giving us a little insight into the hard work that you've been putting in, and the staff as well. I'm sure it's a collaborative effort from the children, the staff, and yourself as well have all been involved in making this cultural change. And it's nice to hear one that Ofsted have actually recognised it as being positive and giving you great feedback on that. So you should feel very proud, and I'm pleased, and that's nice to hear that it's been recognised, and you can do it and meet Ofsted's requirements.
Yeah, but I hope it does more than just apply for one school. I hope that this gives a mandate for me to be able to say, do you know what, this works, and it's got the rubber stamp as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. So if any of you out there have found what we've been talking about useful, interesting, and you feel that maybe somebody in your life, whether it be a teacher, a parent, or anybody, could benefit from knowing more about this practice, one, obviously, Roger is active on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he'd be happy for people to reach out to him if they've got any specific questions, especially in a professional capacity and stuff like that. But otherwise, thank you very much again, Roger, for your time. And
You're very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure.